My friends at Easy Cater are workplace catering pros, helping you find food for everything from daily employee meals to staff meetings and special events. Visit easycater.com/leaderassistant to find out more.
Hello, Jeremy. I'm Eryn Anitavi from Seattle, Washington. Our leadership quote of the day is, build a life you don't need a vacation from.
The Leader Assistant podcast exists to encourage and challenge assistants to become confident, game-changing leader assistants.
Are you tasked with ordering food for your office? Let me tell you about Easy Cater. With over 100,000 restaurants to choose from nationwide and 24/7 customer support, Easy Cater helps assistants like you and me succeed at work and makes our lives easier. Visit easycater.com/leaderassistant to find out more. Hey friends, welcome to the Leader Assistant podcast. It's episode 232. You can check out the show notes for this conversation in this episode at leaderassistant.com/232, leaderassistant.com/232. And today I'm very excited to be speaking with Eryn Anitavi. And Eryn has been an entrepreneur since the bright young age of 10. And she's co-founded her first real company, she says in her bio, when she was 16 and participated in the sale of that company when she was 19. So definitely business minded from a young age. Eryn, welcome to the show. And please tell us where you are joining us from.
Yes, indeed, Jeremy. I'm coming to you from Seattle, Washington. And yes, summer. And we have our 3 weeks of sunshine, and then it'll be rainy for the rest of the year.
So, there you go. I was in Seattle. I think I've been there once or twice. And one of the times I was there, it was rainy the whole time, except one day it was sunny. And it was just like the most beautiful city ever when it was sunny. And
that's kind of how it goes. I'm trying to talk the family into checking out bioluminescence, which requires the sun. And so we'll see. We'll cross our fingers.
Nice. So tell us, a little bit about your family and your hobbies before we jump into the professional side of things.
All of the fun things. Business is business, and personal, and especially in executive support, man, it all blends together, right? So all the fun things. I think we learn a lot in business with our hobbies and the things that we love. And so I do as much of that as I can myself, hiking and waterfalls. I love waterfall questing. And do archery, and I like cosplay and top hats, and oh my gosh, anything that scares me. I'm like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
Love it.
Weave all of that into the world of the entrepreneur, because it all blends. The epiphanies that come by staring at a waterfall, you're like, oh my God, this is the missing piece. This is what I needed to know. This is what, oh yes,
Yeah. It's funny. Yeah. It's like all my ideas come when I'm on a walk or taking a shower or hiking or just staring off into the distance.
Oh, this is the best things, I tell you. Yeah. I read a book on energy management, and that flipped my world upside down. It was like energy management, not time management. So then I was like, went back to the drawing board and like, I have to rewrite everything now. And so.
Well, do you happen to remember what that book was?
Yes, called The Power of Full Engagement. They recommend it 150%. Yes, it is absolutely an incredible book. And it talks about energy and recovery and the holistic existence, right, of who we are, that it's work, but it's also, you have to be mindful about recovery, and you have to focus on where you're spending your energy. You can have all the time in the world or none of it at all, but if you're not watching how you're using your energy, none of that matters, right?
Yeah.
So those.
It's funny how you bring this up, because I just had a conversation with some assistants. I do a weekly assistant Zoom call, and we were talking about kind of tracking our time and tracking what we do for our executives. And then I was talking about this conversation that I had with my CEO on a different podcast, but then I actually share that conversation on this podcast, which, let me look up real quick. That was episode 227 for those listening, if you want to check that out. Episode 227, conversation with my CEO. But he talks about how, a lot of people talk about time management, but the reality is, energy management is more important.
Yes.
And
it is 100%.
So it's funny that you brought that up, and I'm going to definitely share the link to that book in the show notes so people can check it out at leaderassistant.com/232. But energy management, big thing. And I want to talk a little bit about that in a minute. But first I have to know, I read your bio, and I kind of teased it out a little bit at the beginning. And I have to know, your young entrepreneur journeys, what kind of things were you doing at the age of 10, and what was your first real company, as you said in your bio?
Right.
I gotta hear all that entrepreneurial journey story from 10 on. So why don't you enlighten us?
Well, let's see here. My mom is a bit of a farming human. And so we had chickens growing up, and I was the egg lady, and I got to keep 25 cents out of every dozen that I sold. And so I'd go out and I'd have bags strapped to my shoulders, and I'd walk the neighborhood and sell the eggs, go door to door, and plotting and planning how to utilize my revenue. And it usually ended up in the form of a bag of candy from the general store.
Right.
And then I would, I think she paid me like 10 cents to iron like the household shirts and stuff like that. So it was always kind of like attaching business and, if you do this and then this happens, and you're like, oh, okay, all right, that's Pavlovian. I got that. I can do that. Reward. I like that.
Yeah.
And then I was homeschooled up till 7th grade, and really wanted to go to public school. Finally talked both of my parents into letting me do public school, and loved it. And then when I was right before my 16th birthday, they moved me from the big city up to this tiny little town in Montana. And I was an angry, teenager, like, oh, you've ruined my life. I went into the high school there, and I was like, all right, I don't like your school. I'm angry. I'm mad. I don't want to go here. I only want to take a couple of these classes. And they were like, yeah, city girl, you get to enroll all the way or not at all. And I was like, fine, not at all. I'm just going to get my GED. And my parents agreed, let me do that. So I went and jumped into that, and then fell in love. And he was like, oh, I'm going to start a company. And I was like, oh, I'll help you with that. I can do that. I know how to run, admin. I can handle that. So when I was 16, we co-founded a window and door company. And the running joke was, just don't tell anyone how old you are. So I started learning operations and accounting and how to manage employees, and reading blueprints and working with vendors and all of the different things that go along with that. And then we sold that company when I was 19. Ironically, on the same day that my firstborn son was born.
Wow.
He was a little early, and the doctors were like, well, you really shouldn't leave the hospital. And I was like, I have ribbon cutting and papers to sign in 8 hours. I have to go. so yeah, 8-hour baby and me, like, we headed out, and I was like, man, and I ordered all the catering. I'm not going to miss this party. Are you kidding me? Like, no.
Wow.
So that was the sale. And then I worked there for, I think, another year, I think it was, while he went and started another company. And then I left the window and door and then went and joined and did the same thing, all operations and management and kind of managing the books and all of that stuff for smart homes and audio and video and engineering. Learning so many business, so many things.
That's great. So when did you kind of doing that, I'm sure that you did a lot of things that, maybe even if your title was an executive assistant, you did a lot of things in a smaller business like that were essentially executive assistant tasks. So
right.
when did you, I was looking at your LinkedIn, you were an executive assistant at a couple different companies. So when did you maybe decide to do that, or did you decide to do that? Was it just kind of a phase that you went through? Did you like that role?
Well, like you said, operations is very, the chief of staff concept, and learning how to navigate a business. You have a creative visionary who wants to achieve something, and it's that entire back end. It may not have been that title, but it certainly was that all the way back. And when I moved here to Seattle, I was like, man, I'm tired of being an entrepreneur. I don't want to do this anymore. Just want to be an employee. It's tired of working so hard. And I thought, okay, well, executive support, like that works. I know all of the things that go with that role. I was like, didn't know that's what it was called, but yeah, that works. So I worked as an EA here in Seattle. That was just shy of a year, and I went to this networking event, and someone was like, "Hey, can I hire you like 5 hours a week?" I was like, "Oh, wait, what? 5 hours? Yeah, like freelance executive support." And I was like, is that a real job? Like, what is that? So I tried doing that, and I thought, oh yeah, this uses all the same skill sets. I can handle it. And that led to referral, which led to referral. And then kind of as the summary goes, 2 years later, I'm running payroll for 8 people. I'm like, oh my gosh, I did it again. Entrepreneur again. I wasn't going to do this. So then it was at that point that I had to decide if I was going to actually take it seriously or, go do something else. And obviously I decided to take it seriously. So now we just passed our 5th anniversary. So pretty significant. It's like crossing a state line. It's like nothing really changes, but you're like, nah, everything's changed.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. So how many employees do you have? And is it essentially virtual chiefs of staff and executive assistants?
Yeah. Remote. The word virtual has some connotation to it in our modern world that's a little sticky, kind of like it's been commoditized, so it drives the value low. But the remote fractional chief of staff is such a vital role that is manifesting today. It's a special role because it's this holistic thing, right? You're taking a creative visionary and you are building this foundation and this framework to help them achieve everything that they want out of their life. And it is a delicate balance of psychology and energy management and time management and your own personal skill sets. And so much. I think it's one of the most special roles that exists inside of an organization.
So how big is your team then? How many chiefs of staff and executive assistants are
So
on
we
your
have
team?
we have 14
Nice.
right now. Yep. And most of our folks are U.S. based, but I do have a handful that are outside the U.S. I'm hoping to expand. On the path of being an entrepreneur, you go through many experiences, and I had a number of mentors tell me that when you hit 10 people, the wheels fall off. And so I was like, okay, all right, I'm going to be ready for this. I'm going to be ready. I know it's coming. And in November of 21, we were at 28 people, and then the wheels fell off. And my systems were just not robust enough to handle the rapid growth and the operations and everything. And it just, oh man, that was hard. That was really hard. So it started kind of dropping off a cliff, and I went back and I was like, wait a minute, no, I need to assess everything. And so I did a whole complex analysis on our systems and our operations. Like, we have to fix everything that isn't working. And it took us about 6 months, and we built the scaffolding and the framework and everything. And then in June of 22, I restarted the engine, and now it is everything that I want it to be and more. And so now it's like we're kind of going back up to where we were, and halfway there. I'm like, all right, we got this. We're holding good.
Nice. So what's maybe one example of something that you had to just totally change, and whether it's a software or a procedure, what's an example?
Team training. Team training. I love to hire people with unique backgrounds. I think that in the world of being a chief of staff, executive assistant, leader assistant, it's not your experience, it's your soft skills. It's the emotional intelligence. It's everything that goes around to, that holistic self. What are your hobbies? What do you like to do? What are your goals? What makes you happy? And how are you building a life you don't need a vacation from? And I love to bring people with psychology backgrounds, so like burned out therapists and burned out social workers. Quite amazing, because there's a lot of psychology. I'm sure you probably find that every day.
Yeah.
It's just a lot of psychology involved in the work. So having folks like that is kind of a leg up, because the tasks, right? Email management, calendar management, structure, operations, all of these things are these things can be taught. But navigating the human mind and the complexity of creativity, that's a whole other ballgame. So burned out psychologists, therapists, and then burned out journalists and film producers and media, because they're used to, so many people think, oh my God, timelines have to do this. I'm like, wait, I only have one executive going to holler at me? This is a piece of cake.
Right.
So when I was running through everything, I kind of hung my hat on the assumption that these folks would just be able to figure out the day-to-day of executive support. And that was an incorrect gamble. So they had all of the things, but then they defaulted into what they knew. And I realized that the training needed to be far more robust. So we actually built a school, quite on accident, but it happened. So it's the Sapphire Academy, and it's an entire curriculum. It's about 40 hours, 10 modules, and it's part of what it takes to. My current theory that I am constructing is that if you go through the Sapphire Academy, I can turn you into a high-level executive assistant. So, come back in a year and let's see if I was right.
Nice. Nice. And so is that for anybody that wants to go through that, or is that just for your contracted employees?
No, it's an anybody. Originally it was internal. And then it became too big to be internal and just too intensive, right? So you hire somebody and that's a lot of training and a lot of material. Yeah. So I decided to take it and turn it into a product. And so I'm working on a whole plan, for sponsoring and training other admins and bringing people with those unique backgrounds and people who are on a career pivot and people who have, strong backgrounds in operations and media. It's like, any of these different fields, right? Okay. What does it take to be a leader assistant? What does it take to be an executive assistant or a chief of staff? It's so far, it's pretty amazing.
Awesome. Well, speaking of chief of staff, and you mentioned that you have executive assistants, remote executive assistants, and remote chiefs of staff. Talk to us a little bit about the trending transition from EA to chief of staff, and what are your thoughts on the differences and that whole, even when you're looking to support your clients, how do you say, oh, you're a chief of staff, you're going to support this person, and you're an executive assistant, you're going to support this person?
Yes, it's my favorite conversation. The 100 and some years ago, right? You have your corporate executive and you have the secretary. And the secretary is the most important person, right? They are the guardian at the gate. They are outside that CEO's office. And if they don't like you, you're not getting anything done, right? That person they are the ones, right? And the CEO relies upon them. They manage all of the things. They manage all of it. And gradually, titles shift. Secretary all of a sudden doesn't mean, the secretary. It means something else, administrative support, right? Titles, and kind of goes through a little bit of an upheaval. And then we have executive assistant that kind of rises up and becomes that person, right? The need of a CEO to have their external hard drive, or that person who's joined at their hip, that need doesn't change. And so it's the title, right? What do you call that person? And executive assistant was the title. And then about, I don't know, a few years ago, with the rise of virtual support, kind of outsourced virtual support, which is primarily a linear task management. It's very straightforward. It's very step A, step B, step C. It's not really executive assistance, right, as we imagine it, right? This is a role that is relatively low level. As an executive, you surround yourself with leaders. You surround yourself with your managers and your directors, right? So why would your executive assistant not also have a leader mindset, right? You have to have that person they're the ones that handle everything. So they have to have at least the same mindset as the other directors and managers and people that are around you. It can't be a low level position. But then the problem is when everybody started going remote, this outsourced virtual assistants, they started referring to themselves as executive support. And it's not what it is. So the industry as a whole, now again, this is my theory, right? As I'm just kind of like watching this whole thing happen over the last 5 years. The industry as a whole pivots. And we start seeing this new title pop up, chief of staff. And I was like, wait a minute, what? What? And as I started looking into it, I'm like, no, this is executive support. Why does it have a new title? This is primarily, private sector or public sector, like government. And like, that's where the chief of staff is. So what is it doing in the private sector? Mm-hmm. And so I just I was like, okay, all right, what's happening here? And I planted my flag on the hill that said chief of staff is the new executive assistant. It's like, that's where it's going. That's what's going to happen. And for my company and the way that we think of this critical role for any executive, I'll continue to use both, but I'm ready to tip into chief of staff because that's what's going to happen, right? All of these creative-minded people, if they ask their teams, I need an executive assistant, and they get virtual support, it's not, they end up frustrated. They're like, this is awful. This is a horrible experience. This is what I want. Because they need somebody with a leader mindset. So we're still in the middle. Chief of staff still has an identity crisis. And it's like, okay, what is it?
It's funny because I've talked to several people about the title and the role and on the podcast and not on the podcast, but it's, it seems like everyone has a different definition of what it is, or like you said, the identity crisis thing,
right.
I don't know exactly what it is, so I love to hear your perspective, and it's very interesting. And it's definitely another
you meet with so many executive assistants. Are you seeing the same trend where it's like, okay, well, this is, chief of staff, like this is what we're doing. This is the high level stuff. Mm-hmm. Are you seeing a similar push in that direction?
I think I'm definitely seeing that. However, the one thing that I would say is maybe maybe it's not that different from what you're saying, but maybe a slight semantic in how we describe it or whatever. But I would say, one thing I liked, I can't remember who I was talking with, somebody on my podcast, but basically they said, an executive assistant, a strategic leader assistant, is also thinking at the high level, and they're leading and they're that executive support and whatever, but they're primarily focused on supporting that executive. And the chief of staff can also be strategic and have that leadership mindset and that executive support, but mm-hmm. they may not be as ingrained in the specific executives day-to-day and, support, but more the maybe the leadership team or the executive team support. And so
yes.
I see, in a way, on one hand, I'm like, well, I think you might be right that like chief of staff is the new executive assistant. But on the other hand, I still think that there's always going to be that direct executive assistant support, especially at the highest levels, like CEO, for example, to where I think that a chief of staff for the leadership team, but an executive assistant on that team for the executive is always going to be needed at those high levels.
Yes. And it depends on the size of the company, mm-hmm. the bigger the company. So I recently did a kind of an analysis into what is the difference between a chief of staff and head of operations, because there's a little bit of blend right between the two. And with a chief of staff, it's a communication and relationship role, where operations is a strategy and structure role. And in small companies, that can be the same person. So that's kind of where you get the chief of staff doing executive support. So there's the split, right? A chief of staff, their direct reports will be executive assistants and the admin team. So that's the only person who will ever report to a chief of staff under, the kind of this theory that I've mm-hmm. created. Whereas operations can have a number of different roles that report to it, but your chief of staff is your administrative person, and they are mm-hmm. all communication. They are like in psychology, right? You have the myelin sheath, which is, what your super highway between your neurons, right? It just like connects everything. So it prevents departments and people from siloing. And So in a small company, your chief of staff is synonymous with that executive assistant, and they can do email management and calendar management, right? They may not have broken out into that. But then as the company grows and that person does need to work with leadership and they do need to have direct reports with the other individuals, those direct reports are based on how can we speed things up? How can we improve the communication and the blocks? And how do we get the CEO his goal or his or her goal to take, that leadership team and get all of that information to the rest of the organization? How do you bring all of that together? And that's your chief of staff. And when they can no longer do the whole thing, then they hire the executive assistant to do some of the more daily minutia, like the email management and the calendar management, kind of structuring that. So it has a growth potential that you see between the start and the finish. It's such a cool role. It's so cool.
Yeah, that's well said. So let's talk about relationship management and maybe even your opinion on, okay, this is generally a chief of staff thing or generally an executive assistant thing, or maybe just a skill that both need to have. But that was one of the topics you suggested we chat about. And I really like that term relationship management, because I do think that there's a lot of political cultural navigation that we as assistants have to do, and that's I think relationship builder might have been the phrase I used I made this little animated video with like 10 traits, and I think relationship builder might have been one of them. But yeah, what is relationship management? Maybe a tip on best practices when it comes to relationship management, and then how that should be an assistant skill set.
Yeah. So communication and relationships, that's your chief of staff, your executive assistant, and anything that falls inside that Venn diagram, right? The crossover between the two. And relationships drive a company. They drive value. They drive creativity. They drive the strategic plan for the organization. How do you get people to adopt? How do you get the client satisfaction and vendor relationships and your team culture and everything that goes into it, right? It's just all relationships. Everything is all relationship. And your executive assistant with a leader mindset is that person who is paying attention to everyone on the team, from the lowest paid employee to the highest paid employee, right? Everybody in between. Where are the blocks? What is happening inside the organization that needs to improve? So that's like on the internal side. So it's a culture driver. Hey, this person needs to talk to this, they could use a direct report, or they could use a one-to-one with this person on the company or that person. They're having a hard time dealing with this situation. Maybe we need to pay attention, right? Turnover prevention, and creating just that cohesive goal where everybody in the company knows where you're driving. So the relationships, and then keeping the CEO connected, right? Because if you have a CEO who is not accessible and is too far out of scope or out of sight, then everybody in the company loses, where are we going, right? They lose that, the CEO ties it all together. It all plays. Now, I will preface that with my personal specialty and favorite, right, is in the small to medium company. When you get into enterprise, this shifts. And this paradigm doesn't necessarily apply. So like my expertise and where I love my playground is in the small and medium business. So the CEO has to be connected, right? That vision has to be transparent throughout the company. So your relationships that go along with your departments and the people that are working in that company, right? Your chief of staff, your executive assistant has an eye on that, right? We see everything. know what's happening. You know, we see what's happening. And if there is a structure in place to call out things that need to be addressed, or bottlenecks, or people who are toxic, or people who are struggling, or people who are overworked, you know, your resource management, all of that stuff, right? That is within visibility of a connected, leader-minded executive assistant. So that's kind of an untapped superpower. You know, any executive be like, hey, what's going on with the HR department? You know, they're having a hard time getting a hold of people. They're not responding. Like, what's going on? Oh, well, yeah, this and this and this, right? If we do this, then we can make this happen. I've already got it handled. And then on the external side, as leaders, as creative individuals, as visionaries, you can only keep so many names in your head. And who those people are, every relationship is connected. There's a whole river of connection. You know, this person leads to this, which leads to this, which leads to this. And your executive assistant can take that entire capacity and, with the right tools, help that executive maintain more meaningful relationships with the people that are in their network. Oh, hey, I had a meeting on, Tuesday with, John, and it was a great meeting. And, he's taking his family on a vacation, and they'll be gone, till, they'll be gone for like 6 weeks. It was cool, whatever. 6 weeks later, you have an email in the executive's draft created. Hey, how was the vacation? We talked about that. Was it great? How's the things? And all of a sudden, John feels seen. Like, oh, wow, you remembered that? Like, that's really cool. Thank you. Yeah, it was a great vacation. Mm-hmm. And then anybody that feels seen and feels heard inside of a CEO's network, they make referrals. They give testimonials. They stay connected. They drive value. You never know where that river is going to go. But if you just blow it off as a random relationship, you're missing so much impact or potential impact.
Yeah, well said. Well, Eryn, this has been a great conversation. There's one more topic I'd love to chat about, and that's the real cost or value of an executive's time. And I know you have to kind of prove that out to executives in order to, convince them, if you will, to hire a remote chief of staff or remote assistant. And I also know that executive assistants, we often are saying, we're managing the most valuable asset of the organization, which is our executives' time and energy. Mm-hmm. But it's sometimes hard to really quantify that real cost. So what are your thoughts on the real cost or the real value of an executive's time, and how do you maybe quantify it or, persuade executive teams to really place the value on their time?
Think strategically. When you hire somebody in marketing or you hire a salesperson, that ROI is easy. Oh, salesperson is responsible for X dollars of sales. Yes, they've paid for their salary. Yeah, mm-hmm. That's an easy one. With executive support, it can be mistaken, and I do use that right intentionally. It can be mistaken as a liability, but it is absolutely an asset. It is not. It is an overhead role, but it is not an overhead role, because your executive is responsible for driving that vision. They are responsible for the creativity. And another quote that I do or use, I think it comes from video gaming, is death by 1,000 cuts. And the worst thing an executive can do is, this will take me 2 minutes. Oh, this will take me 3 minutes, 5 minutes. I'll be there in a second. Hang on. I just need 5 minutes. It's not 5 minutes. It's not 2 minutes. It's this. And then the little rabbit trail that goes after it. And all of a sudden you've blown 10 hours in an entire week. During that 10 hours that you've been doing those 2-minute death by 1,000 cut tasks and things that you have no business doing, what epiphany did you not have because you weren't managing your energy and going to take a walk and thinking about something that the company needs? What meeting did you not have with the person on the team that needed you the most? And now next week they're going to put in their notice because they don't feel seen and they don't feel heard. What strategic plan did the leadership team come up with that is now getting backburnered for a third week in a row because, oh, I forgot I was going to look at that. I'm so sorry. I didn't get to that. Give me another week. All of those different things are not getting done because they're too busy focusing on things that they should not be focusing on. So for your executive assistant, that's kind of where you want to drive that value. That's kind of where you want to focus on. Okay, you're not doing that. Instead, these are the things, where is that? That's the value. As the executive, if you're, say you're valued 1,000 an hour or 500 an hour, 10 hours, you should have had a $5,000 idea. You should have had a new product line, a turnover. How expensive is turnover in a company? How expensive are unproductive, unhappy employees? Very expensive. And if you have an executive and their leader assistant, their chief of staff, their high-level executive assistant, if that person is paying attention to the value and the things that they are doing to allow that creative visionary to drive, you want to tap into that. And that's how you flip the role from a liability into an asset. That executive cannot live without that person. Right? They just can't. In a small company, okay, maybe fine. But at the moment that you hit when your energy management is now tapped and you're too tired to do the things that you need to be doing the most, that's what is that? The word's escaping me. Opportunity cost is massive, and it snowballs. Every week that you don't, snowballs. And now, right, we've all been to those board meetings where like, oh, well, we only got one of our Q1 goals finished out of the 5 that we planned for, so we're going to bump those to Q3. Now, what would have happened if Q1 goals had been done in Q1 like you wanted? Right, your executive assistant can drive that. So now at the end of Q1, right, you're analyzing. You're like, oh my gosh, look at what we did, right? And executive assistants are not naturally going to be the ones who step up and say, yeah, I did that. You're like, you did that because I was available. It's a background role, right? They're not that kind of person. One of our tips like that we do is everyone on our team keeps a weekly journal of their wins, because everyone forgets how much, right? They forget. And so if you keep a journal of all of your wins every week, relationships that you managed, clients that renewed their contract, or staff that had a change of heart, or teams that felt supported, right? You just track all of those wins in whatever categories you want to track them. And at the end of the quarter, you can revisit that and see, well, what happened because you did all of these things? What was made possible for the company because you did all of these things? And then there's your ROI. You take the value of the strategic team. Yeah, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah. That's great. Great tip. Well, Eryn, thank you so much again for being on the show. Where's the best place for people to reach out if they want to learn, either just say hi and connect, or if they want to learn more about Sapphire and maybe they have an executive or a friend that needs to hire a remote assistant or chief of staff, or maybe they're even thinking, hey, are you hiring a remote assistant, down the road? So
yes, indeed. Or training, or
the training. Yeah.
Things. Yeah, definitely. It's probably our website, which is www.choosesapphire.com, Choose Sapphire, and company is Sapphire Partners. So, that is the best way to get a hold of us.
Perfect. Well, I'll put that in the show notes at leaderassistant.com/232. And best of luck to you. Thanks so much for sharing your insight. It's definitely fascinating, the whole Chief of Staff EA conversation going on. And I loved your unique perspective that you brought to the conversation. So appreciate you chatting.
It's wonderful, Jeremy. Thank you.